We are on Daf Tes Amid Beis, and we're in the sugya of bor, Bershus Harabim, a pit in a public domain, which has a halacha of a private domain, and carrying from one into the other. The definition of a bor Bershus Harabim that has the din of Bershus Hayachid, a pit that's in a public domain and has the halacha of a private domain, is that the pit itself is 10 tefachim deep. The next few cases the Gemara is going to be discussing is where the reshus, the domain, changes as you place or take something from there. For instance, the first case, it is 9 tefachim deep, and you take out a clump of dirt or a brick or whatever it may be that's at the bottom of this pit, and by removing it, it becomes 10 tefachim deep. So at the same time that you remove this, so you pick something up, it becomes a private domain. And so you, in removing that, are picking something up from a private domain. But before you picked it up, it was not a private domain. It was not a Reshus HaYachid because it was not 10 tefachim deep yet. You're creating the depth and removing something at the same time, or vice versa. You have something that's 10 tefachim deep. When you place that brick there, that clump of clay there, a clump of soil, which is going to define which is going to remain there and become the ground of that pit, you put it into a Reshus HaYachid, into a private domain. But once you put it there, it's no longer a private domain because it is too deep. Or a case where you had something that was more than 4 tefachim wide, and you put something in there, so it's a Reshus HaYachid. But when you put it there, it becomes a divider in there. It's going to be made as a wall, and now either side is less than 4 tefachim wide. So it's no longer going to be a private domain, a Reshus HaYachid. But at the time that you put it in, it was, and by putting it there, it divides it. So those are the cases that the Gemara is going to talk about. And the question is, do we look at it as the place prior to you putting it there, or as the place as defined when you put it there? And the same in taking. Do we look at it at the moment that you were going to take it or begin taking it? What domain it was, and it was not yet a private domain? Or do we say, no, as you took it, at the same time it became Reshus HaYachid, so you took it from Reshus HaYachid? Boy Rabbi Yochanan, this is about midway on Tzadi Tesamad Base 99b.
Could I ask a question first?
Ask a question. Bur Tisha va'akam menachulya. The pit is 10 tefachim deep. 9 tefachim deep, and you took something 1 tefach out of there. You took a brick, a clump of clay, the soil, whatever it is that you took out. Now it's going to become a full 10 tefachim deep. V'shlimar lasar, and that completes it into a private domain. 10 tefachim deep, 4 tefachim wide. Mahu. So what's the halacha? Akiras chayfetz vasis malacha b'hadei adadi kasig. Do we say that the removal of that piece and the creation of the mechitza, of the space, come at once, and therefore you're obligated because at the time you complete the taking, it is now a Reshus HaYachid, a private domain, and so you took it out of a private domain. Or you're going to be exempt on account of that when you took it, when you began to remove this, when you started the action, it was still not a Reshus HaYachid.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
My question is, aside from the Avara from Reshus HaYachid to Reshus from Makam Pater to Reshus HaRabim, or from Reshus HaYachid, aside from that, is there any problem with the fact that you created you created a difference in the status of that Reshus? Is there any problem with that?
We'll see cases where you can actually, halachically, you're allowed to make a Reshus HaYachid. You're allowed to form a human fence sometimes in order to carry things. Various cases. It is not a classic tikkun. But nevertheless, it is usher in certain cases to make such a tikkun, which would be construction of a domain because you're causing the halachic domain. But either way would not be a deoraisa, would not be a Torah form of construction. There may be digging over here if you want if you need the soil there, and you're trying to make the pit. There could be another malacha. There is no question that there are other things that could be going on. We're trying to figure out whether this counts as carrying or not. There definitely could be other things, such as if you're digging and you need the pit, you're making a well in your field or in whatever it is. So you could have other construction or plowing, digging prohibitions going on. We're asking specifically about is there a carrying prohibition going on to try and define the malacha of Hotzah. But there definitely could be other deoraisa or derabanan issues going on. So that's the first question. It was not yet a private domain or Rishus HaYachid, and you remove a clump of clay at the bottom, which will now define it as a Rishus HaYachid. It creates the correct domain size. And at the same time, you're removing something from there. Does that count as removing from a private domain and you're carrying it up into the public domain, and therefore you transgress Hotzah, taking something out of private domain? Or do we say, no, at the moment you began, it was not yet a private domain, it was not yet Rishus HaYachid, even though that when you take that shovelful of clay, of soil, it turns it into the correct depth for a Rishus HaYachid, you're going to be exempt on this, obviously. And as Michael pointed out, there could be other malachas going on. The imtim tzaloima, and if you're going to tell me, kiva naloyav mechitza asara miikara mechayev, if since there was not a pit yet when you started, you're going to be exempt. What about the other way around? Bar yud v'nasa secha chulya. It was a pit 10 tfachim deep, and you put a clump of clay in there, a brick in there, whatever it may be, or miata, and since it's going to remain there, it's now a part of that floor of it, and you diminish the size of the well, and as such, it's no longer a private domain. So you picked up a clump of clay from the Rishus HaRabim, and you put it into the pit, and it's going to remain there, and therefore it diminishes the size, and it's no longer 10 deep, 4 wide. Do we say that the depth is diminished at the same time that you put it there, and so therefore you never placed it in a private domain, or not? Do we say that they come at once and yechayev, you transgress because at the time you put it, it was still a private domain, or do we say no, it's diminished and you're going to be exempt? Tifshel Medide. Let's learn it from here. The Tanan we learned in our Mishnah. This coming Mishnah. Hazorik arba amos because somebody throws a sticky fruit, a fig, and he throws it 4 amos. So it picked it up in the public domain. It traveled far enough in the public domain, and it hits a wall. Now, so it landed. Where did it land? If it landed above the 10 tfachim, and we saw this many times already, it landed above the 10 tfachim. Since the airspace of the public domain does not go above 10 tfachim, it landed out in no man's land, in makam potter space, and you're going to be exempt. If it landed below the 10 tfachim against the wall, it's as if he landed on the ground and he threw it onto the ground. And since you threw it the distance of at least 4 amos, of about 6 feet, chayiv, you're going to be chayiv. And we asked the question over there, but it never landed. It never landed in the public domain. And we're talking about a sticky, oily, sticky piece of fig, shaninu, which sticks on the wall, and therefore it's going to remain there. And that counts, even though that it's on the side surface, but that counts as landing. But wait, it diminished to 4 amos. You have to throw it 4 amos, but it landed within the 4 amos, because once it sticks to the wall, now it's no longer a 4 amos space. So the Gemara says, no, you can't compare the two. Hasam lemavatale. In the case of the fig, you're not going to keep it there. You plan on removing it from the wall because it's a sticky fruit on the wall. By our case, we're talking about where you put something that will remain in the pit, soil, dirt, brick. Here, you're leaving it there. Rava asked a question. There were pegs or sticks or pillars, whatever it may be, in a public domain, in a Rishus Rabbin. So imagine you have a traffic barriers, whatever it may be. So in a public domain, you have some wall. It's not yet. It's 10 tefachim high, but it's not yet 4 tefachim wide. And you throw a piece of wood, I don't know, a disc, a frisbee, something that you toss, and it lands directly on that, and now that creates the 4 tefachim wide barrier. So now it itself is going to become the Rishus HaYachid, the private domain. So Zorak Daf, he threw a piece of wood, V'nachal Gabi Yesedus, and it landed on some Yesedus, which are pegs, whatever it would be. So this landed on pegs and create a private domain because they are now 4 by 4 wide, and as such, they have the requisite amount in order to be a Rishus HaYachid. Because it itself is that size. So Gemara says, what's the question? Your question is simply, if the same time that you put your item down, it becomes a private domain, whether you're obligated or not. Well, that's the case Rabbi Yochanan had. It's just the inverse. Before we were talking about where you put something you take something out of the depth, or you put something into the depth. And here you're talking about put something up on high. But either way, it's the same question. Does it become a private domain when you throw this wood and it lands on these pegs? Kika Mabai Leila Rava. So the Gemara says, no, Rava had a question that was a little further. One step more. On top of this platform, this piece of wood, was another item. Going the Zorak Daf, he tossed this item, he tossed this tray, v'chefetz al gabav, and another item on it. So what do we say? Since they both land at the same time, it's all happening at once. Or Dilma, perhaps, it's impossible that when it lands, the tray with this item on it, that it doesn't at least wobble or move a little bit at some point after it landed, and only afterwards it rests. So the item on top rests on something that's already a private domain. So it's as if you put the mechitza, which is the measurement of a minimum space, and then you put the item there, and you should be chayiv on account of that teku. And with this, we say that it's an unresolved question, and Tishri Tayas Kushus Abbas. Amar Rav. Rava said it is obvious. Pshitali mayim al gabe mayim hainu hanachasa. Water, when you have two substances two of the same substance, you have water, and you take some water and you pour it onto a puddle in a public domain, whatever it may be, right? So water and water is the same. That is like you put it into a resting place, and the water is now stationary, even though water is not stationary, but you put it, it's as if you put it down on the ground, and you're chayiv for placement of water. What about if I put something that will float in the water? Egos, a walnut, and I put it in the water. and now it's bobbing in the water. Is that placement? Did I now put it down and it rested? Or did I not put it in a public space? And it's not a resting place. If I put it down there, or if I picked it up in a public place and I carried it into my private house, it's not going to count as Akira Nanacha because it wasn't really resting. We are now on Kufum and Aleph. By Rav asked a question. Egos bekli or kli tzafal agabi mai. I have a vessel bobbing in the water, and a nut in that vessel. So the nut relative to the vessel is stationary; it's sitting. The vessel relative to the water is bobbing; it's not resting. Do we look at the item that I took? I take out that nut, the walnut, and I take it out of the pot, and I carry it. So I now picked it up from a stationary place, and so that's called an akira, an uplifting, a removing. Or do we say no? Since the vessel was moving, it's considered like it was not stationary. We look at the nut relative to the pot, and it was stationary. Or there you go. We follow the vessel, and relative to the vessel is relative to the water is not stationary, and therefore the nut in the vessel is also not stationary. And therefore it's not resting. Teku. Yeah. So the early conversations of relative movement. Shemen al gabi yain. What about oil on wine? So they don't mix. So the oil will rise to top and remain separate. So machlokes Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri v'Rabbanan. So here we come to a machlokes in halachas of tuma that will tell us whether we consider it one or separate. The Tanan we learned. Just to review something we've learned many times, a tvul yom is somebody who went to the mikveh already that day, but has to wait for sunset in order for their tuma to completely be resolved. So they had a tuma, they went to the mikveh, and now they're a tvul yom. When they touch teruma, they invalidate the teruma, but they don't make it tummy enough that teruma can now make something else tummy. So you have oil of teruma that's on top of wine of teruma, and because they separate, so the oil is going to be above and the wine is going to be below, and the tvul yom touched one but not the other. Now, if they're one substance, they're all going to be tummy. If they're considered separate substances, since the tvul yom can only make something invalid but not make it tummy enough to make something else tummy, whatever he touched is going to be tummy, and the other substance will not be. So you can drink the wine, but the oil is going to be tummy. The Tanan shemen shetzav l'gabi yayin v'nogat tvul yom b'shemen, and the tvul yom touched the oil. Lo pasal elo shemen. He only turned the oil invalid because they're two separate substances. So you see that the substance above is not a part of the substance below, and therefore, since it's on a liquid, it's not going to be considered resting. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, no, it's all one substance, and therefore it's going to be like water. When you put oil on top of wine, it's going to count as one substance, just as the wine is resting in the pit. So too, the oil that's on top of it would be resting in the pit. So this is machlokes.
There's adhesion. It's not one substance. I mean, it's still two substances, but there's adhesion between them.
Well, obviously, it's two substances. It counts as one substance, meaning it's one. Even though there's different substances, it's going to count as a liquid. We're going to look at it as both liquid, and even though that there's some movement in liquid and it's not fully resting, it counts as if it's on the ground and you've put it down, as opposed to that it's still hovering. Amar Abaye said, so I have a pit that's 10 tefachim deep, which is the minimum depth that it would need to be in order to count as a private domain, and it's 8 tefachim wide. Now, by being 8 tefachim wide, it now has the width of enough to be 2 private domains. But I come in and I take a piece of plywood and I put it down smack dab in the middle of this pit. Now, on either side, you have 3.9 because this is thick enough that I now don't have 4 tefachim on one side or 4 tefachim on the other side. So if I just throw it in and it just lands anywhere, so it lands in a private domain because it's 10 deep and 4 wide. It's actually 8 wide. But if I put it exactly smack in the middle, now I've diminished a Rishus HaYachid on either side. And so at the moment that I put it in, there's no longer a Rishus HaYachid. So Zorak L'Toicha Machzeles, he throws a mat into it, and their mats were stiff. So Sachayev, are we going to be obligated? Because I threw something from a public domain, Rishus HaRabim, into Rishus HaYachid, into the public domain, and private domain. However, Chilka b'Machzeles, if I divided it with this, by minimizing its size, putter, and I'm going to be exempt. Now, Abai is saying exemption here. Wait, at the same time, at the time that I begin to put it in, it's still a private domain. It's a Rishus HaYachid. Only when I complete my action does it become a non-space. Well, why don't I say that the question that Rabbi Yochanan had earlier? Can I say that hanachas chayfetz bitul mechitza v'adi adadi kasi, that they come at the same time, and or not? That was a question Rabbi Yochanan had, and here Abaye is so obvious, is saying that it's obvious that I put this in there and it divides the pit in half, and there's not enough on either side. I'm going to be exempt. The Gemara says Abaye the pshita le b'machzelas. According to Abaye, who says that it's obvious to him that you're going to be exempt by this dividing of a pit with a machzelas, mevatl mechitza, that negates the space. Kolsh ken chulya the mevatl mechitza. Then for sure the putting a clump of clay in a pit 10 deep that becomes no longer a pit, the depth of a pit. For sure, he'll say that's going to be exempt, and he hasn't answered Rabbi Yochanan's question. However, Rabbi Yochanan, who didn't accept that, Rabbi Yochanan the Baile Chulya, who has a question in regards to clay which is soil, which for sure should be nullified to the ground of the pit, and yet he has a question. Then for sure, a machzeles, a piece of wood or a mat, a hard mat, pshita delema vatl mechitza, for sure that's not going to negate the space. Because that's not meant to be there. Verama Abaye. Abaye further said halacha, Bar b'Rishus HaRabim amuka asara ruchava arba milei mayim. Somebody you have a pit in the public domain, and it's a water pit. It's a well. So you have the well is 10 tefachim deep, 4 tefachim wide, the requisite amount to be a private domain, but it's filled with water. Do we say that the water negates the dimensions of the pit, of the well? No, if you throw something in there, chayiv, you're going to be chayiv, because you still have a recognizable pit in depth, according to the way the Ran explains. Rashi says the words that it's not like you filled it, because I guess the water is meant to be taken out. People will be taking the water out of there because they need to use the water. So the water is separate from the dimensions of this well, of the pit. However, Malaya Peros, but if it's filled with produce, and you throw something on top of that, you're going to be exempt. What's the reason? Water does not negate the dimensions of the pit. But the produce does negate the dimensions. So for Rashi, the Rishonim explain the reason is either this is rotting produce that's bad. This is a compost pit essentially, and therefore it's meant to remain there, so it negates the depth and dimension of this pit. or we're talking about produce, even then it's good fresh produce, but it's produce I can't move on Shabbos on account of that it hadn't been tied. It's non-mu'usar. Truma and Meisos had not been taken from this. And therefore, it's muksa, it's tevel, because I can't use it on Shabbos. So it's muksa, and is of no use. So it's essentially just a storage pit. And even though that it's good produce, and eventually I mean to take it out, but since on Shabbos I can't move it, and Shabbos I can't take any out for Shabbos' sake, in relation to the halachas of Shabbos, it's going to be nullified to that space, and it negates the depth of the pit. As I mentioned,
I would assume it's not just water. Would be wine or fruit juice or any liquid. Would that be correct?
According to the way Rashi's learning and they're understanding Rashi and the Rishonim, that the reason is because it's usable, and I don't intend to keep it there. So anything that it depends simply whether I can take it on Shabbos or I intend to keep it there. If it's something that's muksa, or I don't ever intend to take any out of it, so then it remains for the purposes of Shabbos, remains a filler and basically a filled pit. There's no pit left. Whereas if it's something that we intend to take out or people want to use, then it's going to be then it's going to be independent of the pit, and the pit still maintains its dimensions. That's the way they're understanding Rashi. So your wine case, typically the wine is there to be taken out, and if it's tithed, it's already mu'usar. So and you can take it on Shabbos. So it's going to remain independent of the pit and doesn't negate the dimensions. However, if it's non-tithed, it's non-mu'usar, so then it would have the same halach as produce. Because since I can't use any on Shabbos, so the wine remains there for the duration of Shabbos, and for the purposes of Shabbos, it's essentially a non-entity because I cannot move it. It's muktzah. And so for the purposes of Shabbos, this pit is non-existent because it's filled with temporarily, but it's filled.
So it's not a function of liquid, non-liquid. It's a function of I could use it, or I'm planning to use it, or I couldn't use it.
That's according to Rashi. The Ran and other Rishonim learn that it's whether you can, it's recognizable, whether it's recognizable dimensions. It's mechitzas nikeres, and therefore the question is, by produce, it fills it and it's a solid and you can't see it. Water, even if it may be murky a little bit, but it's recognizable dimensions. You can put your hand in it, you can feel the sides. Wine, I assume, would be the same as and it's therefore a function of liquid, I would assume, and therefore wine would be the same. Indeed, we learn similar to this. Somebody throws from the sea into the public square, or vice versa. Potter is going to be exempt because the sea, the water, is not a private domain. It's a carmelis. It's essentially a public space that's not enclosed. So Reb Shimon however, Reb Shimon says, wait, if there's actually in the sea a area that's 10 tefachim deep, 4 tefachim wide, and it's not just this a slight incline, but there's some sort of rock formation that creates a private space, a reshus hayachid halachic space of 10 deep, 4 wide, even though it's filled with water and the water is overflowing that, it'll count as a private domain. And if you threw from there into the public street or vice versa, you'll be chayiv. The next Mishnah. Azorik arba amas b'koisel l'malam asarat tefachim kezorik ba'avir l'matma asarat tefachim kezorik ba'aretz. As we saw, the Mishnah brought this, and we've seen it many times. Somebody throws something and it lands on the wall. They throw something against the wall. If it's above 10 tefachim, it's in the airspace above public domain, and he's going to be exempt. If he throws it 4 amos and it hits the wall and lands on the wall, as the Gemara is going to explain, below 10 tefachim, so that's in the airspace of Rishus HaRabim. It counts as if it landed in Rishus HaRabim. So you did all 3 parts. You picked it up, you carried it across or threw it across, and it landed in the public domain in Rishus HaRabim, and you chayiv. Hazorek ba'aretz arba amos chayiv. And of course, if you throw it on the ground 4 amos, it's going to be chayiv. The Gemara had questions, v'halanach, right? The assumption was that we're talking about just a ball or something, and it bounces off the wall. No, we're talking about a sticky fig that's stuck to the wall. In the name of Rabbi Chia, I threw something on a wall. It landed above the 10 tefachim, but so it's in Makom Potter, in exempt space. However, it landed on a wall that the wall itself, if I dug out the space, it's a tiny ledge on the wall. But if I dug it out, I would have, it would be 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide. So this is a machlokes elsewhere in regards to mezuzah. We saw this already earlier. And the machlokes of Chacham and the Rabbanan. You imagine that this has been hewn out, that this has been carved out, and you have the 4 tefachim space of a platform. And since there's enough wall there, the depth of the wall is enough that you could make the space. It's as if it's there. And according to Chachamim, they say that we don't imagine that you've cut it out and you've made the space. It's what in reality is there, and therefore we don't dig in, we don't hew it out, and we don't make believe that we don't look at it as if the surface has been cut out. So it would not transgress on a biblical level. You don't need a chatas. Indeed, we have a brisa like this. You threw it above 10 tefachim high, and it landed in a hole, even a small, tiny hole. Rameh says you're obligated on account of you look at it as if you would have, if you had cut it, if you had dug into it, would you have enough space to create this Rishus HaYachid space? Then it counts as a space. Another halacha. This is the halacha of a halachic walls. The halachic wall doesn't have to be exactly 90-degree a vertical angle from the ground. It could actually be a leaning wall. It would also count as a wall. How much leaning would count as not horizontal space, but rather vertical space? So the halacha is, if it's so steep that within 4 amos, which is, let's say, 24 tefachim, within 4 amos, it'll rise 10 tefachim high. So let's give it about a 25-degree angle. If it's a 25-degree angle, it's a little less, that would be steep enough that you can't really walk it easily. That's not a normal walk. So take 30th coming up from Beaverton Hills, the highway, all the way to Capitol Highway. 30th is just not a normal thing to walk. And it's not easily walkable, and it counts as a halachic wall. So people coming down from there, coming to shul, are climbing walls to get to shul. Amar B'Yudam Arav, tell a hill, hamislaket, which tapers, asara mitoch arba, 10 tefachim down within 4 amos in length, counts as a separate domain, and therefore zorak v'nochal gabav chayiv. And since it counts as a separate domain, if somebody's standing in the public sphere, in the Rishus HaRabim, and he tosses onto such a hill, he's going to be chayiv because it counts as a private domain. Tanya Namehach, indeed, we have a brisa that concurs with this. Mavui, a private street, so a side street, off of the main thoroughfare. Mavui sheshava l'toichei v'naaseh madar Rishus HaRabim. On the street itself is smooth, but to get down to the public street, to public thoroughfare, there's an incline, and that incline is 25 degree angle, maybe a little less, right? Which is a tela mislaket asara mitoch arba, which is 10 tfachim deep in 4 amos long, or vice versa. The public domain is higher than the private street. So as we'll see, a side street, if you want to make an eruv there, you need either a lechi or a kara. A lechi being a vertical side post, or a kara, which is a horizontal upper post, in order to delineate the space. But this doesn't need it because it already has a natural border, a natural incline. Many of the borders of our Portland eruv also have tel hamislaket. Almost 80% of it is actual wall, or tel hamislaket halachic vertical halachic wall. So we see that this brisa also, this Mishnah says that indeed this tel hamislaket counts as a wall. And it concludes with this halacha that Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel says that if you throw from a public space onto such a hill, that's going to count as a private domain, and it's going to be pater. Sorry, chayiv. You're going to have transgressed picking up in a public domain, throwing it onto a private domain, because this hill creates a wall, and it counts as a public domain, private domain. Sorry. So again, I will keep on mixing it up. You pick up in a public domain, throw it onto the hill. That incline counts as a wall to create the private domain, and you picked it up from the public domain, threw it into the private, and that's going to be chayiv. You're going to transgress. Mishnah. Zorak l'toch arba amas menizgalge chutz la'dalat amas poter. You throw something, and the wind is so strong that even though you threw it beyond, you threw it into the just into your own 4 amos, which would not transgress, the wind carries it out outside of the 4 amos. You're going to be exempt because that's not your action. The wind did it. Chutz la'arba amos, if you threw it beyond 4 amos and the wind blew it back, you're going to be chayiv because you threw it beyond and it came back in. So Gemara says, but it never landed in the public space. So why are you chayiv, even though that, yes, you threw it beyond 4 amos, but before it landed, the wind blew it back. So why does it count as your action? And it never landed there. It must be that it landed on top of something for a second and then the wind blew it back. And indeed the Brisa says this. He threw it beyond 4 amos, which is a complete action. He picked it up, he crossed more than 4 amos in the public sphere and put it down, even though he threw it. So it came down on its own, but the wind blew it back in. It brought it back in within the 4 tefachim, so that diminished. It's 4 amos. It's not the full distance. Even though it took it back in and out, it's going to be exempt. However, if the wind was so strong that it kept the item stationary for a moment, so I threw it and the wind was so strong that it stopped it for a second and then blew it back, so that stationary moment counts as a landing in the beyond the 4 amos. Even though it blew it back and it landed ultimately within my 4 amos, chayiv is going to be chayiv because that moment that the wind was strong enough to keep it in its spot and lock it before it blew it back is going to be the landing. And Rava says, even though that would be, has to be that it was in the space of the ground, here it needs to land on something in order to be obligated. Yassim Marema Kamal So Marema repeated this halacha that even according to Rabbanan who do not say Kluta Kamisha Hunchadami, that once it's absorbed in the airspace, it's as if it landed. The Rabbanan do not say that, and therefore they say it actually has to land on something within the airspace. Amalei Ravina Lamarema. So Ravina said to Marema, we turn now to Kufa Base. Lab Hainu Masnitin. Isn't that our Mishnah? That the Mishnah says that it was thrown out and it was blown back in by the wind, and he's going to be chayiv. And Rabbi Yochanan explained the reason is because it landed on something. So you see that you need some sort of landing. No, he said that you can't compare the two. Misgalgel and Sefer Lanuach. In the Mishnah's case, where Rabbi Yochanan explained that the wind blew it back, it never was going to end up landing in the public domain or beyond the 4 amos, because the wind was blowing it and the wind was going to blow it back. It's just that for a moment it had to have landed on something in order to be chayiv. Here I'm telling you, even though it's going to land, still the Chachamim say I'm not obligated until the moment it landed. Hi. I may have thought over here it counts as landing because my intention was for it to land, and it will ultimately land, and nevertheless I'm going to be, it doesn't count as landing. I may have thought it counts as landing, and that it doesn't. And what difference does it make? If in a second it's going to land, what difference does it make? So Rashi tells us there's a great difference. We know the halacha is I'm only obligated in a chatas, in a sin offering, if the entire action is done, the entire malacha is done with my lapse of remembering it's Shabbos, or my lapse of remembering that it's prohibited. I pick it up, I throw it, and it's within the 3 tefachim of the ground, and somebody says it's Shabbos, and I'm like, oh my goodness, and then it lands. So it landed at the point that I already remembered it was Shabbos, or remembered that it was prohibited to do this. So the first 2 parts, the picking up and the carrying across, were done with a lapse. But within 3 tefachim, 10 inches of the ground, I remembered. So if you say it's as if it landed, so because it's in the airspace, so then it counts as lavud, or you say lavud, so then it counts as I completed my action already, and I have to bring a chatas offering. But what he's saying over here is that no, that according to Chachamim, it did not land yet, and therefore, even though in a moment it's going to land, that landing, which is the completion of the malacha, happened after I already remembered it was Shabbos, and it's not going to count as a malacha. Hazorek b'yam arba amos potter. Somebody throws in the sea 4 amos is potter because it's going to be exempt on account of that it's not a public domain. It is a carmelis. But if you had a puddle in the street and people walk through it, even though he throws into the water, it's going to count as public domain, and he's going to be chayiv. How much is just a puddle? When is it no longer a puddle? If it's less than 10 tefachim deep, it counts as a puddle. And again, the Mishnah repeats, if you have a puddle of water and people walk through it, you walk through it, somebody throws in there is chayiv. So somebody, one of the Chachamim asked Rava, I need to tell you twice this halacha of people walking through it. That makes sense. Because it wants to tell you that even though that people, it's usable, but it's not really usable because it doesn't. Sorry?
You skipped hiluch al der chak.
Sorry?
Kamash malan hiluch al yedei chak shmei hiluch.
Yes. So even though that it's not easily to walk through, even though you don't walk through easily, nevertheless it counts as a public sphere, a public space, because people do walk through it, and it counts as a halachic public space. Tashmish, and it wants to tell you that, but however, it's not so usable, so the usability is not going to count as space. We're going to start this Gemara again tomorrow.